Okay, good afternoon, and bear with me for 1 second. Just need to make sure this is recording. Sorry about that. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining our briefing on the City of Philadelphia's response to rising gun violence. This Zoom room is for press only. If you are not a member of the press, please log out and watch today's live stream on the City of Philadelphia's Facebook page. We're going to start off today with Mayor Kenney, but after that, we will hear from a number of speakers, including Erica Atwood, who is Senior Director of the Office of Policy and Strategic Initiatives for Criminal Justice and Public Safety. Also, Shantae Love of the group Every Murder is Real Healing Center. Dr. Ruth Abayo of the Philadelphia Department of Public Health. She is the Injury Prevention Program Manager there. Jennifer Clark is co-founder of the Pennsylvania Safety Alliance. And then we will hear from Police Commissioner Danielle Outlaw. That will be followed by press questions. For now, we'll begin our briefing with opening remarks from Mayor Kenney. Mayor, you have the floor.
Thanks, Mike. Good afternoon, and thank you all for being here. Before we begin, I want to say, in light of the worsening gun violence that's plaguing our city, we had originally intended to provide an overview today on our updated roadmap to safer community strategy. The roadmap, which was originally created 2 years ago before the pandemic, was always intended to be reviewed and enhanced over time. We bring strategies to scale that are working, pivot from ones that we found ineffective, and not be afraid to try new things. We've been working across the government to update the roadmap in light of the senseless shooting and other challenges caused by the pandemic. In light of the federal aid the city is receiving from the American Rescue Plan, and the fact that in 2 weeks I'll present a budget and 5-year plan to City Council, we decided to wait until Budget Week to share the full scope of our updates. So in the next update, we will provide details on how we'll invest in the strategies in Roadmap 2.0. I believe you'll see the fuller picture this way. For today, we are joined by Erica Atwood, Senior Director of Policy and Strategic Initiatives. We are joined by Dr. Ruth Abayo of the Philadelphia Department of Public Health to provide other updates from the ongoing violence prevention work. Erica will provide an update on her team's community engagement efforts and the latest round of targeted community investment grants that fund anti-violence initiatives. Also with us today is one of our most invaluable partners, Shantae Love, whose organization, Every Murder is Real Healing Center, is one of the grant recipients. And while I'm pleased to have Jennifer Clark with the Pennsylvania Safety Alliance, who can share advocacy efforts underway and how the public can get involved. Finally, Commissioner Outlaw and her team from the department will provide a crime update, and we'll open it up to questions. So at this time, I'll turn it over to Erica.
Good afternoon, everyone. During my time this afternoon, I'd like to go over our community engagement efforts and our strategy. Is the PowerPoint up? There we go. One of the key tenets to our roadmap to safer communities is our stronger community engagement and partnerships. And one of the things that I wanted to focus on in taking this role is doing that deeper dive and implementing some of the most important parts of the strategy, which is connecting with community and particularly youth. Next slide. Our goals around community engagement are to raise awareness of what's happening in our cluster as a whole. So with office prevention, with violence prevention, re-entry, criminal justice, and Town Watch. We also want to support grassroots organizations that are on the ground with technical assistance and elevate the good work that they're already doing. And provide as a resource and a hub for violence information and support. And so we'll be talking about what we are doing to get more information out there. And then lastly, we have to work kind of hands-on with community, providing not only resources, but being on the ground with them. We'll talk a little bit about that as well. Next slide. So first thing, we have a website. I am pleased to announce it is phila.gov/CJPS. It tells you all about what we are doing. We'll be constantly updating it on events and parts of the strategy. You'll be able to get in touch with all of our offices through that website. Next slide. Additionally, we've launched the social media platforms. We're starting with Instagram and Facebook, and we will be not only updating you with upcoming events, important and critical information, events from our partners and our grantees. And please be sure to check out Philia Live 215 on both Instagram and Facebook. Next slide. To make sure that what we are doing is relevant, we will be putting out an RFP for community organizations to help us drive the brand and the messaging. So we are looking for social media influencers that will help us build out what will be a critical piece to our engagement strategy. We have to make sure that we are communicating in the right language, culturally nuanced to the right people, as we are looking for that authentic engagement through social media. So if you want more information about this, you can email, again, cjps@phila.gov. Next slide. I mentioned this in our last briefer, but I want to talk about this again, and we'll be launching kind of an information form for other folks that want to get involved in our Next Gen Task Force. This is we're pulling together a group of youth leaders from across the city who are doing the work on the ground, that are leaders on their blocks, in their neighborhoods, and their organizations. We are working with them not only to help elevate the work that they're doing, but strengthen their foundation of their impact, and provide an opportunity for them to collaborate and build coalitions, not only with their peers, but with multi-generational leaders as well. Next slide. We'll be also launching a campaign called I Need You to Survive, which is a faith-based action plan. This is an opportunity for our leaders within the faith community to get involved on multiple different ways. It's a way to kind of galvanize the support of the efforts in our violence reduction efforts. It's a way to illustrate what we are doing in our willingness to partner. It is an opportunity for us to really kind of put our boots on the ground in a way that centers faith and healing. Next slide. There we go. One of our first events as a part of the CJPS, our Criminal Justice Public Safety Cluster, will be a collaboration with the Philly Spring Cleanup. We are doing it in two neighborhoods, Cobbs Creek and Strawberry Mansion. If you want more information, you can reach out to our community engagement manager, Mars Hobson. He'll be coordinating the cleanups in these two neighborhoods on Saturday, March 10th. And this will be the unofficial kickoff to National Youth Violence Prevention Week. Next slide. National Youth Violence Prevention Week was established in 2001. It is really focused on how we elevate young people who are at risk and impacted by gun violence in their leadership, in telling their stories, and also working on solutions towards the issue of gun violence. Here we have a calendar of events, a tentative calendar of events that we're working on. We'll be adding to this list. If you are a community organization that will be doing an event as a part of Youth Violence Prevention Week, we are happy to promote it and partner with you. So please send that information to our office. Next slide. One of the critical pieces of violence reduction and harm reduction is our work around behavioral health. And there's an opportunity for every individual to get engaged. And our Department of Behavioral Health is doing, during that same week, a network of neighbors training. It is how we can, as neighbors, as community members, be in support and respond to the issue of violence. You can find more information about the training on, which is everyday virtual, on our behavioral health website. This is going to be an opportunity to really give individuals in our communities the tools to help not only themselves, their family members, and their community members to heal when we are impacted by violence and trauma. Next slide. We are also partnering with the Department of Health to bring awareness to the issue of straw purchasing. The prevalence of guns in our communities is astounding. And I will say that in partnership with the police department, they've done a wonderful job in getting an insurmountable amount of guns off the street. But there's more that we can do, and really beginning to educate individuals about the impact of straw purchases and the implications and the effects of it, and what the responsibilities individuals have about with straw purchasing and participating in that. And so you're going to see this imagery, as a number of others, really talking about what that impact has on our community, and what are the resources to kind of curtail straw purchases. Next slide. And so here's the great news. We're kind of putting our money where our mouth is. We are launching today, or announcing today, our third round of targeted community investment grants. This is funding that we are giving to grassroots organizations that are really focused on interrupting the cycle of violence. These grants range from about $7,500 to about $20,000, and we're giving about $400,000 to 30 community groups. And so, next slide. These are all the groups that we're giving information to, and you'll be hearing from one of our grantees, Shantae Love from Every Murder Is Real, momentarily. But this is just the beginning. It's a continuation of what I will say is a beginning of how we are putting priority in the sustaining of this work in community organizations. We're really looking forward to continuing these efforts. We will, before the end of the fiscal year, before July 1, we will be announcing kind of a next round of grants, and hopefully with the support of some other partners, be able to increase the total amount as well as the individual amounts of our grants that are going forward. Next slide. Actually, this is my last slide. So with that, I will turn it back over to Mike.
Thank you, Erica. And now we are going to go to Shantae Love. Shantae, I'm going to go directly to your slide presentation. Put the camera up on you when you're completed. So bear with me for 1 second.
No problem.
There we go.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Shantae Love from Emir Healing Center, which stands for Every Murder Is Real. And I will tell you that partnering with my partners across the city is a very essential and reason why we still continue to do the work we do. And I'm going to give you a little information about Emir Healing Center, of us healing the city, and our main goals of who we are and what we do, and our future and where we're headed, as well as why partnerships and collaborations and collectives is extremely important. Next slide. So Emir Healing Center is a community-based organization. You can go to the next one, that works with families and communities that's been impacted by homicides and violent crimes. We've been here for more than 20 years, and you will notice that our logo is the Phoenix, because we believe that we can take people, walk with people through their emotional and mental trauma and their spiritual journey as they begin to heal through pain. Next slide. We have 3 main goals: healing, intervening and preventing. And that is extremely important in the type of work we do, and is important to our communities as we continue to unravel and stop the epidemic and the pandemic of violence and homicides in our cities. Next slide. And I will tell you that our main goals is how do we heal a community? We're looking at healing the trauma of through and concrete coping skills, healing from racism, internalized oppression, using trauma-informed and holistic approaches, being very cultural proficient. Because what we do know in Philadelphia is that we are a city of neighborhoods, and that what happens in West Philly and in South Philly, even though we all have the bloodstains of violence in our communities, we do also operate sometimes differently. We do come together differently, and also offering alternative ways to healing. And that the healing from violence can't just be a one set and one way, because we know the complexity of violence is a magnitude of different things. Next slide. And so us moving forward, this is the different services that we offer at EMIR. Our victim services is, of course, we're working with those that are survivors and community, offering them victims compensation and in-court advocacy. But we also have our alternative wellness, which is our grief support groups, our trauma yoga. We believe that if we could capture people and give them the skills that they need to heal through what they love to do, then we can do that. If we can educate you and treat you and know what you can understand what trauma looks like through the lens of your children, then the communication and how they move forward in life could be different. We also offer our restorative justice, which we are working with communities that have been not only impacted from violence, who've been exposed to from maybe police, but as well as those who have caused harm. How do we create a dialogue, and how do we create conflict resolutions? How do we have that space for those who have been harmed and who have caused harm to come together to create better relationships? And our newest one is our housing. We have been able to offer relocation for families who have been impacted by homicide and violent crimes, emergency shelter, as well as some assistance so that they can still stay forward. Also, although the pain that we have talking about from homicide, there is no words that can measure. There is not enough screams. There's not enough tears. But if I can help you go through this, even though it's a horrible thing that I can't erase, could I help you sustain your life? And could I help you move in a way that validates your pain, but also could we start changing the landscape of our city? Move. Next slide. And that's also by working with our young people, offering them life building skills. And that's what the part of our We Live project. Our We Live projects allows them to address their past and current trauma. It all looks at the how their coping skills is. It goes deep into their life. How do they choose the people that they're around? How do they become the voices that is important? How do they learn about their stress management? How do they obtain good health care? All the wellness opportunities that's needed to be healthy in a community and in a family. We've decided let's look at the trauma of that and let's try to reset it. Next slide. And we do the same thing with our parents. And the reason why is because what we realize is that families are struggling. Families are struggling. COVID was just another layer of opportunity for our communities to fall to pieces. But what have we seen? You can move to the next slide. We have seen that as we start looking at it, we assessing our communities, we having deeper understanding, better conversations, asking the right questions, that we can engage partners to do a response that's responsible for each other to really succeed. Now, you can take me off the PowerPoint. And so what I'm saying is this, is that working with community partners and being able to do this type of work is necessary. That we know violence is extremely high here, that we do have to change the landscape. In order to change the landscape, it's going to take all of us. It's going to take the work that we do from the community and grassroots level to come together, which you will realize and see through relationships is that we've always worked in a way almost like almost like a hand tight like this, that we have always come together, we've always worked together. And so the power of many of us that are looking at one one situation and one system, and that's the system of violence and the issues behind violence, which is poverty and trauma and education, that I'm happy to see that I'm one of the recipients, but also that some of my partners that I do work with is also a recipient, because we all work as one. We all have our entities that we work and specialize in. But what if we were able to do this straight across the city with so many community groups that are able to do this type of work and the work they do? And if we can do this in a larger magnitude, can you imagine what happens? And what happens is what I tell some of my partners to say, that we get together and we make magic happen. Is that we have the opportunity to change the environment, because what we're looking to do is change the environment for our communities, Black and brown communities, impoverished communities that is riddled with bullets. Change the environment so that they have the opportunity, young people have the opportunity not only to live, but not only to just survive, but to thrive. And that's extremely important. And it will take all of us. And people say, well, why should we continue to do these target grants and these pockets of money? It's because what's important is that you have people in the community that build relationships, and it's the humane thing to do. And that there's not an option of we do one or the other. We do the large things and we do the smaller things, but we do it together, because it allows community members that have seen an issue in their neighborhood and said, I want to be the solution. And to be the solution, it takes dollars. And to give them some dollars to do some bodies of work is a good thing. It's a great thing. And I want to thank you. And if you have any questions about the work that we're doing, the partnerships that we have across the city, but especially in the Northwest, our collective, that we're looking at violence as a whole, and we all are moving in a direction together, please reach out to me. We're having our rapid meeting on Saturday for our community members, and we are taking this issue and we're coming together to build this bridge to change this community, and we're going to do it one block at a time.
Great. Thank you very much, Shantae. Now we're going to go to Dr. Ruth Abaya, who is Injury Prevention Program Manager for the Philadelphia Department of Public Health. Dr. Abaya, are you there?
I am. Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
Do you want to start the slide presentation now? I can go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, that's perfect. All right, so good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for giving us the opportunity to talk about our program and about the ways in which our violence prevention work fits into the larger landscape of violence prevention in the city at the moment. Next slide. So just a little bit about the program, just for those who are not familiar. The Injury Prevention Program was formed in the Health Department in the summer of 2019. It's housed within the Division of Chronic Disease and Injury Prevention. And currently our team members are myself, the program manager, and our excellent injury prevention epidemiologist. So we just wanted to provide some updates about what our work and the scope of our work looks like at the moment. You can go to the next slide. So the first thing we wanted to bring to people's attention was the launching of the Injury Prevention Dashboard, which just happened a few days ago. The purpose of the dashboard is to develop a centralized data source for internal and external partners. So we're all looking at the same violence trends, the same data to inform our work together. So this is just an image that demonstrates the front of the dashboard. One of the main things we wanted to be sure to communicate was that it's in its first phase. So we fully anticipate that in the future, we're going to be building out the dashboard to meet the needs of violence prevention for the city. And we also want to draw people's attention to the survey at the bottom of this page. We're interested in feedback from partners both within and without city government so that we can make sure that as the dashboard evolves, it includes the types of information that are most relevant to solving the problem of violence on our streets. Next slide. So we begin the dashboard just as an overview, talking about the social determinants of health, and this is intentional. We focus on just 4 social determinants in our first phase, and those include poverty, lack of educational attainment, specifically high school diplomas, employment, and then opportunity youth between the ages of 16 and 19 years of age. Our goal is to demonstrate how these specific types of disadvantage might overlap with where we see non-fatal and fatal shooting victims throughout the city, and how when we start to look at these upstream drivers of violence, we might start to see changes in the way that, that we see shooting victims geographically. So that's the purpose of this tab. Next slide. So we also use the dashboard to trend shooting incidents over time. So this is just one image that demonstrates a couple of key points, one of which is just a variation in shootings over the course of the last several years, and how we can kind of use this to inform what we're doing on the ground. But in addition, a key point that many of you are already aware of, which is that the majority of our shooting victims in the city are non-fatal. And so there are many survivors, and a lot of the work that the city is doing and that we're interested in seeing done involves responding to and appropriately meeting the needs of those who are survivors of gun violence. So the other thing that I think is critical in addressing this public health crisis in our city is understanding who it affects. Many of us are generally and globally aware that overwhelmingly the people who are victims of shootings in Philadelphia are young, tend to be from minority communities, specifically non-Hispanic Black males. But we're also trending other demographics to see how they change over time, especially how they change with various interventions. Next slide. And this is just another way of depicting that. So using kind of rates versus numbers helps us to understand better how this specific issue is affecting different demographics and how we can really compare them in a way that's reliable. So both of these different forms of information are provided for our use. Next slide. So we also do trend firearm suicides, which we think is important to keep sight of as we look at this issue. So we look at overall numbers on an annual basis. And in addition to that, we look at how suicides manifest in different demographic groups. Again, this is something that I think is important to keep track of over time. And it's a public health crisis that has potentially different upstream drivers and needs different types of responses and solutions. And so we wanted to be sure that our dashboard addressed that. And then finally, we look at 2 different metrics that get a sense of some of the downstream effects of gun violence on our city, specifically some of the ways in which we see it straining our healthcare system, something that was highly relevant, certainly in the last year as we were contending with COVID-19 at the same time. And so what this demonstrates here is how ED visits have changed. This looks at 3 different years of data and how ED visits, specifically due to firearm-related injuries, changes over the course of the year. So this is helpful to get a sense of one specific aspect of medical care and medical utilization around gun violence that we can again track over time. This is the other piece of that. And so we look at one element of cost. We definitely wanted to emphasize that the most important cost of firearm violence is the human cost. And that's something that we definitely do not want to lose sight of. But we do want to make sure that we're keeping track of all of the other ways in which these costs are manifesting in our society. So this looks at a very narrow portion of the costs of gun violence, specifically those related to hospitalization here in Philadelphia. And this helps us look at that information by quarter and then also over time. So this particular graph looks from 2016 to 2019. So the second development that we wanted to be sure to discuss today was how the public health framework is going to be manifesting in the roadmap, which we'll be discussing in subsequent weeks. And so what we've been tasked with is developing a public health framework that helps to give a comprehensive overview of how violence manifests in Philadelphia, what are the drivers, all the way from host human factors to social and environmental factors, and then how we can look at these factors both before gun violence occurs, at the time that it occurs, and afterwards. And the vast majority of our capital we would like to see spent on the pre-event phase, so before violence occurs, if we wanted to take a truly public health preventative approach. But this is the framework that will be plugging a lot of the work of our partners, both again, within and without city government into. And so the output of this, ideally, you can show the next slide, yeah, is that we focus on, again, the pre-event factors, and we take the work and the programs and the policies that are in existence in Philadelphia and plug them into each of these boxes. That will help us to do two things. The first is that it will help us to identify where we have gaps, if there are specific areas in the whole landscape of prevention in which we don't have significant programming and could benefit from more. And it will also help us to see where we think the major drivers are in our city, unique to our city. So we're hopeful that this will be a significant contribution to the overall work. Next slide. So finally, we just wanted to kind of give an overview of what else our injury prevention program works on. So many of you are familiar with the Homicide and Non-Fatal Injury Review Team. We just discussed the dashboard. We are part of a number of different policy coalitions, one of which you'll be hearing more about today. We also are a member of the Philadelphia Interagency Research and Public Safety Collaborative, which is a combination of law enforcement agencies, the Managing Director's Office, and we at Public Health, which has been a fruitful partnership to look at, again, the same data with different lenses and come to hopefully some novel conclusions about it. The Injury Prevention Registry is one of our projects that we are passionate about as a way of trying to identify the best way to connect people to resources. We have a series of youth engagement partnerships that help to really focus our efforts in youth, which is something that I think is a critical focus. And then the ongoing work of data dissemination that is part of what we do at the health department. I did want to just take a moment to mention the PA Safety Alliance, one of the coalitions that's mentioned here, which was formed in partnership with the Public Interest Law Center and a number of other local partners, including Ceasefire PA, all of whom are committed to identifying and working towards the most evidence-based policies for the entire Commonwealth. And so here to discuss more about that today is one of our partners in this work, the former executive director of the Public Interest Law Center, Jennifer Clark, who was integral in kind of getting this work launched. So I'm really delighted that she's able to join us and tell us more about that work.
Thank you, Dr. Abaya. And it's really wonderful to be here because what we're doing is we're attacking one of those myths that prevent or paralyze people, everyday people, from acting. And that myth is that there's nothing we can do, nothing works. And that's wrong. And it's wrong on a lot of levels. And I'm here to talk about one of the ways, one of the things that does work and can work. And that is, and one of the ways that people can get involved. And that's the Pennsylvania Safety Alliance. Can you put my slides up now?
Give me 1 second there.
Sure. So the Pennsylvania Safety, and you can go to the next slide. The Pennsylvania Safety Alliance is based on the recognition that everybody in Pennsylvania shares certain values, not just Philadelphia, but Pennsylvania. And that is that we want to be safe. We want our loved ones to be safe. We are, and there are things, there are evidence-based policies that we can use. So for example, the Pennsylvania Safety Alliance has faith leaders, it has teachers, it has nurses and doctors. We have the gun violence prevention groups, we have disability groups, we have law enforcement agencies. Some of us are gun owners and some of us aren't. So if you could just go to the next slide. So one of the things that people fight over is, and you hear this particularly in the national arena, is which is the one thing that's going to work? Is it this thing or is it that thing? And I heard Shantae Love say this too, but it's not just one thing. There's no complex problem that has just one solution. So we at the Pennsylvania Safety Alliance have taken on one of the many things that can work. And that is, we are advocating for a state law that would require people to get a permit before they purchase a statute. This is a law that says, a permit before you have to purchase a gun. So this requires you to go to a law enforcement agency or an independent agency, get a permit before you get once you get your permit, then you can go and purchase a firearm. So can you go to the next slide? So permit to purchase laws, and one of the main reasons that we are advocating for it, is that they work. They work to reduce violence. And we've got public health research that shows us that. So you see the various studies that are cited here when our neighbors in Connecticut and New Jersey passed permit to purchase, it reduced homicides and suicides. And when Missouri repealed their permit to purchase laws, suicides and homicides went right back up. So when you look at it, it works, and that's why we're advocating for it. We go to the next slide. So a lot of people will say, well, why do you want permits to purchase? We already have background checks. We already have laws. Why don't we just enforce those laws? So there's some things about permit to purchase laws that make them particularly effective. One of the things is that you can't just walk into a dealer and buy a firearm. And that cooling off point, that cooling off period is critical. If you're contemplating suicide, for example, that couple day wait while you get your permit is critical. If you're angry at someone, you can't just walk into a dealer and walk out with a gun within a matter of minutes. So the cooling off period is a really important part of why permit to purchase laws work so well in other states. They also have, it's more than just a background check. Often there are fingerprinting that is required. There's firearm safety training that's required. So the permit to purchase adds something to the background checks that we already have in Pennsylvania. And then the last point about why a permit to purchase law could add to what we already have with background checks is when you think about the incentives for an independent authority, say law enforcement, issuing the permit, rather than just relying on the dealers. Dealers have an incentive to make a sale. So dealers may not question IDs. And we talked about straw purchasers earlier. If you're a straw purchaser, you're contemplating going in and buying 100 guns and then selling them to people who aren't supposed to have them, you're much less likely to walk into a law enforcement agency and ask for a permit to buy 100 firearms than you might be to just walk into a dealer. Next slide. So another one of the myths out there is that there's so many people, particularly in Pennsylvania statewide, that are gun owners and that we could never get anything through the legislature. So it turns out that most people support sensible gun regulation, most people in Pennsylvania. So we at the Pennsylvania Safety Alliance did a poll this year in February. It was done by Terry Madonna's group, and it polled registered voters. Let's go to the next slide. And what we found was surprising, actually, to me, but almost 73% of Pennsylvanians, of registered voters in this poll, favor a permit to purchase law. That strong support. 68% of people favored fingerprints before you could get a permit to purchase. And then the most important finding of all was that 65.2% of gun owners favored a requirement to obtain a permit to purchase. So what we're seeing here is strong bipartisan support for this type of law. So what we don't have right now is a legislature that listens to us, but we do have strong support. So what is it that you can do if you go to the next slide? So the fact that we have this mismatch between what people in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia and Pennsylvania want and what our legislature is doing tells us that we have to build a movement. We have to get people from all over the Commonwealth, Philadelphia and all over the Commonwealth, from all walks of life, to demand that we have better, more sensible gun regulation. And it may also mean that what we're going to have to do is get a new legislature and make sure that the legislature is listening to us. So what you can do now is join the Pennsylvania Safety Alliance. Join the numbers so that we have numbers that can't be ignored. You can join it as an individual or you can join it as a group. You can contact us and we'll do a presentation for your group or your friends, and we'll talk to you about what a permit to purchase law means, why it's important. We can talk to you about some of the demographics that Dr. Abaya gave, particularly the impact of gun violence on young Black men and the impact of suicide on older white men in other parts of the Commonwealth. So we'll do a presentation so that you then can go and talk to your friends about permit to purchase. You can talk to your legislators about a permit to purchase law. You can get involved in committees on Pennsylvania Safety Alliance. We have a lot of work to do, and we have lots of things for people to do. And you can sign our petition. And we have here our website and our email address so that if you have questions, particularly those of you who today are reporters, you can contact us at our website or through our email. So thank you so much for letting me speak today.
And thank you, Jennifer. We're going to move now to Police Commissioner Danielle Outlaw. Commissioner?
Thank you. As we stated in our last meeting, the purpose of these bi-monthly press conferences are to increase transparency and to keep an ongoing and open dialogue on what's going on in our neighborhoods. And so in that spirit, before I turn it over to Deputy Commissioner Joel Dales and then Deputy Commissioner Ben Nash, I want to provide everyone with a quick update on our shooting and homicide stats. And I just want to let folks know, I use the word stats or statistics, but I want to remind everyone that these are human beings that we're talking about here, that we're discussing. There are human beings at the end of every number, at the end of every heat map, someone's loved one. So I just want to be in that with this information that we're sharing. To date, there have been 491 shooting incidents here in the city of Philadelphia. 48 of those victims have been under the age of 18. We've had 120 homicides year to date, with 15 of these homicide victims being children. 15 of these homicide victims were children. 13 of these children died as a direct result of gunfire. This is absolutely unacceptable. Over the last year, there's been a heavy emphasis on our enforcement efforts, our short-term enforcement efforts by all of us here at PPD, due to the increase in homicides and shootings we've experienced. Of course, we also want to get ahead of these incidences of violent crime. And we're doing everything that we can with the resources that we have to focus on our long-term prevention and community trust building efforts, whether it's through our Community Relations Bureau, our Civil Affairs Unit, the Police Athletics League, our police chaplains, the police district advisory committees, or even through our district community relations officers. We will continue to work in partnership with the Office of Violence Prevention and other violence disruptors to ensure our approach is balanced and responsive to the needs of today's communities. But in the short term, again, we will continue to see enhanced visibility, increased partnership, not only with our local partners, but with our state and federal partners. And we will do everything that we can on the enforcement end to make sure that our communities are safe. With that, I'm going to turn this presentation over to Deputy Commissioner of Patrol Operation Joel Dales, who will give you a breakdown of the recent gun violence that's been happening in our city.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Commissioner Dales.
Thank you, Commissioner. Can you pull up my slides, please?
You bet. 1 second. Can you see that?
Yep. Next slide. Okay, I will start with the citywide homicide and shooting victim stats. Looking at the top left of the chart, year to date, as of March 28th of this year, Philadelphia had 476 shootings. And out of the 476 shootings, 117 were homicides. As of 3:30, we're up to 120 now. In comparison to last year's homicides, we are up by 29%, 117 versus 91, and shootings are up 51%, 476 versus 316. Out of the 117 homicides, 30 occurred inside a residential building. It's not listed on the chart, but 5 of the homicides occurred inside a commercial building, which brings the total of homicides that occurred inside to 35. Looking at the bottom left of the chart, it shows the motives for the homicides. The top 3 motives are: number 1, arguments; number 2, drugs; and number 3, domestics, which is currently up 43% in comparison to last year. Next slide, please. All right, to the far right, as you can see, it says from the week of 3/22 to 3/28, we had 8 homicides. The last time we met 2 weeks ago, we had 12. We had 35 shooting victims this week, which includes the homicides, and 23 shooting occurrences. Shooting occurrences is an incident count where an individual or individuals were shot, and basically it's pretty much counting the incidents, not the number of victims. And as you can see, since the last time we met, the criminal shooting victims, we went from 48 to 35. And that 35 number includes the 7 victims that were shot on Columbus Boulevard during this week period. Next slide, please. All right, this slide shows the comparison between citywide homicides and homicides that occurred in the pinpoint grids. Citywide homicides are up 29%. However, the pinpoint grids are down 32%. Next slide. This slide shows the comparison between citywide shooting victims and shooting victims in the pinpoint grids. Citywide shooting victims are up 51%, and the pinpoint grids are slightly up 5%. Next slide. This here is a year-to-date in reference to VUFA arrests by divisions. I'm looking at 2020 versus 2021. From January 1st to 2021 from January 1st of this year to March 29th of this year, VUFA arrests are up by 99%, which, as you can see at the bottom right of that chart, we are now at 816 VUFA arrests versus 411 last year. And that's a significant increase. 2 weeks ago, we had 690 VUFA arrests. As you can see, a majority of the VUFA arrests occurred in Southwest Division, Northwest, and East Division. Next slide, please. All right, this map here, this is a heat map of citywide VUFA arrests from January 1st of this year to March 28th of this year. The darker colors are where the majority of VUFA arrests occurred this year. Next slide. This slide shows a heat map of citywide shooting victims during the same period as the VUFA arrests. The darker colors are where a majority of the shootings occur year to date across the city. The darker colors are also identified as our hotspots. And just to clarify that you know what VUFA arrests are, VUFA arrest stands for violation of the Uniform Firearms Act, meaning that a person was in possession of a gun illegally. So next slide, please. So when you put the both heat maps together, it shows that the VUFA arrests and shootings are occurring in the same spots, which are our hotspots. So this indicates that we are focusing on the right areas that are impacted by high levels of gun violence. So we are laser focused on where we need to be throughout the city. But unfortunately, the shootings are continuing to happen. Next slide, please. As of 3/29 of this year, as you can see at the bottom right of the screen, 1,478 crime guns were recovered in our city. Any gun recovered by the police as part of a criminal investigation is considered as a crime gun. And I want to remind you again that the number does not include gun buybacks or turn-ins. Next slide, please. And lastly, in reference to the ATV and dirt bike initiative, we started the initiative on 3/20 of this year. The last time we ran it was 3/27. As a result of the detail, we confiscated a total of 63 combination of ATVs, dirt bikes, and miscellaneous vehicles, meaning they are pretty much either was a motorcycle, a scooter, or a mini bike. That's what the miscellaneous number represents. I know you're wondering, why did you confiscate a motorcycle? Well, If the violator, if the motor, we can confiscate the motorcycle if the operator is in violation of the motor vehicle code statutes, which one, they probably didn't even have a license, or the motorcycle wasn't registered, or it was suspended, the registration was suspended. If you look at the bottom where it says other, where you see 67, that represents the number of ATVs, dirt bikes, and miscellaneous vehicles as a whole that were confiscated this year outside of the detail, meaning that officers on routine patrol, they are also still confiscating vehicles. And also at times you have the detectives, when they're conducting investigations, at times they will confiscate vehicles, ATVs, dirt bikes, miscellaneous vehicles, etc. So that's what that number represents. So as a whole this year, so far, we confiscated a total of 130 vehicles. So with that, I will now turn it over to Deputy Commissioner Ben Nash, who is the Deputy Commissioner of Investigations, who will speak about cases we wish to highlight this week.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner Dales. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to now provide an update on several recent high-profile incidents of gun violence. To start, I'd like to speak about the tragic murder of 11-year-old Harlee Balance that occurred on Friday, March 26th. Our homicide unit has worked hard to identify a suspect we believe is responsible for the tragic death of an innocent 11-year-old child who had the terrible misfortune of being outside on a scooter on a beautiful early spring day. Our investigation has identified a 19-year-old male, Khalik Cooper Baldwin, as the individual responsible for the murder, and we have obtained an arrest warrant for this morning. His photo will be made available through our public affairs office in the near future. Next, I'd like to provide an update on a shooting that occurred that same night and left 7 people wounded. We're going to show the video, so please start the video. I want to caution everyone that some may find this video disturbing. Just 1 hour after young Harlee's tragic murder, a popular commercial area of our city was lit up with gunfire by 2 brazen and indiscriminate suspects that fired on a group of individuals that were on the sidewalk outside of the Golf and Social Club at 1084 North Delaware Avenue. 7 individuals were struck by this awful display of gun violence that was captured on the video being displayed. While investigators from our East Detectives and other investigative units have worked continuously to develop a motive and identify the 2 shooters, we are hopeful that this video will encourage members of the public to come forward with additional information to assist our investigation and bring these brazen criminals to justice. Lastly, I'd like to provide developments and updates on 2 significant recent cases that have had positive results to reveal. First, I'm pleased to provide updated information about an arrest that was adopted by our federal partners involving Gregory Stevens, who was initially arrested by the Philadelphia police on March the 10th for a robbery and shooting of a pharmacist that occurred inside of the Universal Pharmacy in the 3900 block of Kensington Avenue on February 22nd of this year. Just days prior to Mr. Stevens' arrest, Mr. Stevens also managed to terrorize a motorist and his relative along Broad Street as a result of a road rage incident. Mr. Stevens was captured during this terrifying incident on social media video, brandishing a firearm. As a convicted felon, Mr. Stevens was prohibited from possessing a firearm at any time. Mr. Stevens was initially charged locally, but as I said, he's now facing federal charges and prison time for the robbery and the shooting from February. And he continues to be investigated by the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of PA for the road rage incident with the gun. And finally, a quick update on a young man that was profiled 2 weeks ago as a wanted person for a murder in West Philadelphia on Christmas Eve last year. With assistance from a member of the public, Mr. Amin Hurst was captured on March 20th, and he has been charged with murder. I want to take an opportunity to remind everyone that all tips to help us identify and locate dangerous criminals can be called into our tip line at 215-686-TIPS or 215-686-8477, or anyone can call 911 at any time. I'm now going to turn it back over to Police Commissioner Outlaw.
Thank you, DC Nash. As was stated, so far this year, our officers have removed over 1,478 crime guns from our street, 138 of which have been privately made firearms, also known as ghost guns. As a reminder, crime guns are guns that are recovered by the police as part of a criminal investigation, and this number doesn't include guns that are turned in as part of a gun buyback program, for example. In addition, our officers have made over 700 arrests for violations of the Uniform Firearms Act, for VUFA, so far this year. This number continues to trend up year over year. Our young people are continuing to turn to guns at an alarming rate. Our children have access to weapons. We need to do everything in our power to steer them in a different direction. Make no mistake, our officers remain dedicated to doing their jobs. They continue to conduct lawful investigations and make meaningful quality arrests. Yet and still, despite our officers' tremendous efforts, we continue to be plagued by gun violence. You've heard me say it before, and I'm gonna keep saying it. This isn't simply a policing problem. Our entire community has to work together to turn this around. This isn't about following your kid to the mall. Find out who your young people are communicating with and how they're doing it. Our kids are now hanging out on social media. This is where they live their lives now. It's okay to be nosy. So many issues these days with our kids begin on social media and are now ending tragically in person. Lastly, I'd like to remind everyone, please use our anonymous tip line. The number is 215-686-TIPS. With all homicides in our city, there is a standing $20,000 reward for information that leads to the arrest and conviction of a suspect. If you have any information, you can either call the tip line or you can text the tip line. Again, that number is 215-686-TIPS. That's 215-686-8477. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you to all of our speakers. We're now going to move to the Q&A portion for reporters. We do have very limited time. We're going to try to go about 20 minutes or so for questions, and we ask you to limit your questions to 2 or fewer. Let's start off with Saj Purple Blackwell of PQR Radio.
Peace and greetings and good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
All right. I have 2 questions and I'll just ask them back to back, and then they're really for the general, for the panelists and anyone who wants to answer. But the first question is, being as though, and this is a community question, people are feeling like they are dealing with some hopelessness right now. And they would like to know, would you guys consider recreating a program like Operation Safe Streets from the 2002 year and invest the same $100 million into the gun violence prevention? That's question number 1. The second question is, now that our rec centers and playgrounds are platforms for gun violence, as we have seen lately in the news, will we take some of the surplus of the sugary drink tax and that money and take it to protect our playgrounds and recs with things like more cameras and overtime with policing? Thank you very much.
Well, let me start out by saying, 2002, that program, Operation Safe Streets, I don't know how effective it was, but I know there was a lot of criticism of the police for kind of over policing. We want to try to find a balance. I understand the serious nature of what we're dealing with, but we can't, just send police in to do things we don't want them doing to make the situation or relationship with the police and the community worse. And the other issue is this issue of $100 million. I don't know where that number came from, but I can assure you that the money we've gotten from the federal government will have to last us for 2 or 3 years relative to our structural issues on our finances. So I don't know if I don't think there's $100 million extra at that level of spending. And the sugary drink tax, from my perspective, is doing the work it should be doing, and that is educating our kids from pre-K so they get the start that they need so they can get through school, graduate from high school, go to college, and have great lives. So I don't want to be taking money away from our babies, but something we can look at dealing with from a regular budget perspective.
Thank you. And I neglected to mention that joining us today, in addition to all of those who speak, is the Managing Director, Tumar Alexander. Let's go now to Charlene Santiago of Univision.
Hola, buenos días. Dos preguntas rápidas. I believe Armando is online for translating. La primera tiene que ver con los centros recreacionales que estaba comentando la colega. En la última actualización se compartió que ya se está evaluando asignar a oficiales a patrullar en las zonas de áreas recreativas. Quiero darle seguimiento a cuál es el plan a medida que, ¿verdad?, comenzamos la primavera, el verano, dónde se encuentran esos planes para garantizar la seguridad de los niños y adolescentes en las áreas recreacionales.
I have two questions. The first question would be addressed to whom? Ideally, would you like to address a question? Anyone then. The first question has to deal with recreational centers. The last update that we have indicates that there was an evaluation being made about having officers patrolling the areas around the recreation centers. And I wanted to know if there's a follow-up, if there is a plan to implement this as we approach the spring and summer days in order to guarantee the safety of our children at the rec centers.
Good afternoon.
Oh, go
Good
ahead.
afternoon, Armando. And I want to, first, I think I'll answer this question, and also this will tie into the question that Ms. Blackwell asked as well. So we are working with the Office of Children and Families, the Police Department, Department of Parks and Rec, and other partners and volunteers around a summer planning strategy around the safety around our rec centers and pools. As you all know, we've seen some horrific shootings lately that happening around our rec centers and our parks. And we want to ensure that as the weather gets warmer, we have a strategy in place that's not only security, not only programming, but also how are we bringing trauma services to those sites? How are we making sure that families feel safe and secure to have their kids utilize those sites? So that's all planning that we expect to be able to roll out pretty shortly. There's other partners who I haven't mentioned. There's many partners who I haven't mentioned. That's also a part of that planning process.
Esta pregunta también ata con lo que nos hizo la señorita Blackwell. Estamos trabajando con la Oficina de Servicios Sociales y de Niños y el Departamento de Policía, con el Departamento de Parques y Recreación y con otros socios y voluntarios a lo largo del verano para planear estrategias con respecto a la seguridad de nuestros centros de recreación. Como saben, alrededor de las piscinas y en estos lugares hemos visto unos tiroteos horribles que han pasado últimamente y queremos asegurarnos que según el clima mejora y se hace más cálido, tenemos una estrategia que no solamente brinde seguridad, sino que también traiga servicios de trauma a aquellos lugares para asegurarnos que las familias se sientan seguras trayendo a sus niños a esos lugares. Por lo tanto, tenemos planificación al respecto y vamos a anunciar nuestra asociación con otros socios que no he mencionado, porque tenemos muchos de ellos, de manera que podamos avanzar con esto, ofreciendo seguridad a las familias y a sus niños.
Listo. Y la segunda pregunta me llega de un colega y dice, ¿qué pueden hacer los vecinos que enfrentan personas invadiendo casas abandonadas en las que personas usan y venden drogas y constantemente hay peleas que pueden terminar en un hecho mortal, tales como, ¿verdad?, balaceras, por temor a hacer denuncias? Es la pregunta que me llega.
My second question is brought over by a colleague of mine who asks about what can neighbors do in terms of home invaders that are taking over abandoned houses in order to sell them, to sell drugs and use drugs in them, which often leads to arguments which can lead to shootouts. What can they do in that regard?
I'll start, and I'm sure someone from PPD may want to join with a response. I think, as the commissioner stated early, folks could utilize our anonymous tip line, give us that information and allow us to be able to investigate that. And I just think that's the best way, the anonymous tip line way, or folks want to email one of us on this call. They could try to do that as well. But I think the most easiest way is to utilize the anonymous PPD tip line.
Nos parece que la mejor respuesta pudiera ser de que los vecinos utilicen la línea anónima para reportar cualquier pista de esta actividad ilícita y para poder proceder a investigarla, y obviamente nos pueden contactar a nosotros también por correo electrónico, pero me parece que la mejor solución y la más fácil es enviar anónimamente un aviso de que se está dando esta actividad ilícita. Gracias.
Commissioner Dales, would you like to chime in and talk about how operationally we, from the ground level, work with L&I to relay what we see from the ground?
Yes, and we partner with the Office of Violence Prevention that falls under the Managing Director's office. So please get that information out to the district captains. I'm sure the community, we have a lot of community members who are in communication with the district captains. If you haven't had a conversation with the captain, start the conversation with the captain about the situation. The Managing Director mentioned the tip line. So please make note that the number is 215-686-TIPS. You can also go on our website, phillypolice.com, and you can also submit an anonymous tips based on these properties and locations. If the locations is located in East Division, we actually implemented a narcotics enforcement initiative, and these are some of the things that they really want to receive good information pertaining to these houses where they're stashing guns and drugs. And also, what the Commissioner just mentioned, we do work with the license and inspection agencies as well to assist us with securing these properties.
Armando, and in addition to that,
Yes.
if they call 311, they can report any quality of life issue, including abandoned houses, where whether or not it's crime being committed there or not, if that house needs to be cleaned or sealed.
But if there's activity in the house, they need to be specific, that there's people in the house doing something as opposed to just an empty vacant house. You have to differentiate because the one with activity will get a higher priority.
El oficial Dales nos indica que esta información que se puede transmitir con respecto a actividad ilícita debiera coordinarse también con los capitanes en las áreas, porque tenemos socios que nos ayudan para transportar esta información para que se pueda actuar. Se puede hacer esta llamada anónima, pero también nos indica el oficial Dale de que hay un número al cual se puede llamar para reportar actividad violenta, que es el 215-686-TIPS. Adicionalmente al 311, que nos indica Tamar Alexander, que se puede llamar para reportar en la Oficina de Calidad de Vida viviendas abandonadas. Y nos agrega el alcalde de que esta actividad tiene que indicar actividad específica que se note, de manera que el reportar esta actividad, el reportar estas casas abandonadas, puede llevar a resolver estos problemas para los vecinos. Gracias.
Thank you, Charlene, Armando. We are extremely tight on time. We have about 10 minutes or so left and a good number of speakers. So please keep your questions as tight as possible. Let's go to Mike Donofrio of the Philadelphia Tribune.
Thanks. I just have two quick questions. Right, for the mayor, you're not providing any sort of major update today on your roadmap program. What message do you think that sends to residents living in communities plagued by gun violence?
It sends a message that we have had some additional information coming from the federal government, some additional resources, and the budget is being presented in 2 weeks. And we thought it was appropriate to do it all together as opposed to adjusting what we would have announced today.
All right. And then do you believe your administration, which includes the police department, is doing enough to reduce gun violence in African-American neighborhoods, considering African-American Philadelphians account for approximately 80% of all homicide victims?
We are doing our absolute best job that we can do with the resources that we have. And we need, as Shante Love said, we need everybody working together. It's not just a policing issue. Yeah, they're working hard, as you can see by the number of guns that the police have taken off the street, the number of UFO arrests that they've made from an investigative and from an arrest standpoint. Yeah, they're out there working hard every day. And we need to make sure we bring all the other resources to bear to make sure that we get this problem under control.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Let's go to Isabel Sanchez of Telemundo.
Muchas gracias. Armando, como conversamos, la primera pregunta sería básicamente si hay algún esfuerzo en específico realizado por la policía o la ciudad para esa prevención de violencia armada dedicado a las comunidades de habla hispana.
The first question is whether there is any plan and any approach from all these community organizations as well as the police to address specifically the Hispanic community.
Commissioner or Tumar or anyone else?
I'm sorry, Armando, could you repeat the question for me?
Yes, if any of these organizations, any community organizations or the police are addressing this problem in regards specifically to the Hispanic community.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Armando. Excuse me. I think PPD could talk about the initiatives we have running in the East Division. And I'm gonna actually kick it to Erica Atwood to talk about the community groups that Latino, Hispanic groups are part of the groups that we fund. There are some groups down there in that area that's working very hard on anti-violence efforts. I'll let Erica start in with the question around community groups, and then hopefully DC Dales or Commissioner Outlaw could talk about the initiatives that we have going in the East Division.
Sure. Through our Town Watch organization and our leadership, they are engaged with the Hispanic community, and we are partnering with other agencies kind of within the 24th Police District. That is also one of our focus for 24th, 25th, and 39th for our tactical meetings, and that is where we are providing a targeted geographic approach to our violence reduction efforts. And as we move into those areas, we'll be reaching out to who we know are our community partners on the ground in our Latino and Latinx communities to be a part of those, to do some real-time problem solving with quality of life issues.
Armando, do you want to translate Erica before we go to DC Dales?
Yes, I have all of the comments. So in the response, la respuesta es que el Departamento de Policía tiene varias iniciativas en la División Este para resolver este problema que tienen que ver con el acercamiento a los grupos comunitarios de la comunidad hispana y latina que están recibiendo fondos para poder trabajar desde las calles para hacer los esfuerzos en contra de la violencia fructíferos. Y esto nos dice la comisionada Outlaw, nos agrega esto Tamar Alexander, y luego Erika Atwood nos dice que hay programas de Town Watch que están dispuestos a ayudar a la comunidad hispana a hacerlo en el distrito 24, 25, 39, y hay esfuerzos que están siendo directamente dirigidos a áreas geográficas donde se encuentra la violencia para reducirla, y estamos acercándonos a nuestros socios en la comunidad latina para lograrlo. Gracias.
Dales, did you have anything to add on that one?
Sure. What I can touch on the New Kensington district, if you would like. Just in case you're not aware, we implemented a Kensington Police District. The location is at the Impact Services Building. It's staffed by a lieutenant, 2 sergeants, and 38 police officers. Both the officers are both on foot and also on bike. The boundaries are from D to Frankfort, Somerset to Allegheny. The day work shift starts from 3:30 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. Night shift is from 3:30 to 11:30 p.m. And the main purpose was we wanted to intensify our presence and increase the amount of time we spent in that small little area near the K&A section of the city that pretty much are experiencing high levels of gun violence. Their main goals, the officers' main goals, is pretty much number one is to improve the quality of life within the K&A section, such as drinking in public spaces, gambling, graffiti, disorderly conduct, and open-air drug use. That's their main focus. Also, they focus on problematic drug corners and streets, which we implemented a narcotics enforcement initiative, which we added more police officers to our narcotics bureau to focus strictly in the K&A area. And lastly, community engagement and inclusion is very important. The officers in the 24th and 25th district, they are equipped with cell phones now, where they can actually receive real-time information and also can communicate with members of the public. So if you see a foot officer or bike officer in the K&A section, have a conversation with them, get to know them, let them share their information with you as far as giving you the cell phone number, what information you have about issues and problems in your neighborhood, they can address it. They also have access to 311 a lot faster, the 311 system a lot faster if you experiencing a quality of life issue. So they are out there. We also have monthly meetings with the Hispanic community as well. We have great supervisors and commanders in East Division who are constantly engaged with the community. So I can go on and on, but I'm going to save time and we can move on.
Thank you. Armando?
Yes, tenemos esfuerzos específicamente en el distrito de Kensington, en el cual tenemos a la policía, en las unidades de impacto en los servicios comunitarios. Nosotros tenemos ahí un teniente, tenemos a 2 sargentos y a 30 oficiales de policía que están tanto a pie como en bicicleta. Tenemos jornadas laborales que empiezan de 3:30 de la mañana a 3:30 de la tarde y 3:30 de la mañana a 3:30 de la tarde, cubriendo el área que va de la calle D a Frankfurt y de Allegheny a Front. Para poder preservar la seguridad en esta área, nosotros tenemos varias prioridades. Una de ellas es tratar de evitar de que haya actos que afecten contra la calidad de vida. Por ejemplo, el juego ilícito, el graffiti o el uso de drogas, también las esquinas que se vende la droga. Tenemos más oficiales de policía designados para tratar de hacer esto. Y nosotros tenemos en el distrito 24 y 25 teléfonos móviles que tienen los oficiales de policía y que están formando parte de nuestra participación con la comunidad con la cual hay que participar. Ellos están monitoreando el área en bicicleta y si usted los encuentra, por favor, acérquese, salúdelos, comuníqueles los problemas que están viendo. Ellos tienen un acceso más directo al 311 y también tenemos nosotros reuniones mensuales con el departamento de policía y las organizaciones comunitarias específicamente hispanas para tratar de resolver el problema. Y eso es un ejemplo de lo que se está haciendo en el distrito de Kensington. Muchas gracias.
Thank you.
Thank you. Isabel, are you set? We pretty
I
tight
know
on.
it's a little faster. Can I just send another question via email then so we can?
Yes, that would be great. I appreciate that. Let's move quickly to Layla Jones of Billy Penn.
Hi, I just wanted to ask Dr. Abaya how often that injury prevention dashboard will be updated. Right now, it stops at 2020, I believe.
That's correct. So phase one will likely be updated in a few months. We're going to wait for the first wave of feedback through the survey on the usability of the features of the dashboard. We also have to update based on the data sources. So each of the data sources that we use, from census data to data from our colleagues at police, et cetera, are updated at different frequencies. And so the different elements of the dashboard will have different update frequencies. Once we have a sense of how quickly we can integrate those and they can go through the internal vetting system, we can think about having an update schedule for each of the different visualizations.
Layla, are you set?
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Let's go to Aaron Moselle of WHYY.
Hi there. This question is also for Dr. Abaya. Can you just discuss a little bit more the connection between the framework you laid out and the relationship it has with the roadmap? I wasn't quite clear what the relationship was there.
Absolutely, sure. So the roadmap team is actually part of integrating the work of all of the different internal and external agencies onto that framework as you saw it. So the way that that's manifested is that there's an internal working group that constructed within each of the boxes that I demonstrated, what are the pieces that we need to fix? So for example, in the pre-event social environment box, what are the things that we need to address? Subsequently, what we've started next after that working group completed their work is that all of the different players in the roadmap, all of the members of the tactical team are actually giving the programs that they have that fit into that box. And so we have a program that addresses the physical environment in the pre-event space, and it is called THIS. So that actually helps us lay out the landscape of all of our violence prevention programming and fit it into that framework. And then you can imagine a scenario where you take a step back and you can see the lay of the land in one table, which will help us, I think, structure our efforts. Does that help?
Yeah, and so the actual plan will be laid out the Wednesday of budget week. Is that the idea?
So we have to meet.
No, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead, Doctor.
So we have to make sure that we incorporate the feedback from all of the different partners if it's going to be comprehensive. So we will have a preliminary. We started those meetings, and so we will have a preliminary layout, but it's going to be a working document.
All right. Thank you, Aaron, and thank you, Dr. Abaya. Let's go to Denise Murray of the Philadelphia Sun.
Good afternoon, everyone. My question is for Ms. Atwood. You mentioned the grants and the organizations that you're giving grants to in terms of violence prevention. What is being done in the area of accountability for those grants? And what happens if the grantee doesn't make the goals that the grant is supposed to cover? I mean, what happens if it's not effective? What is there accountability for that?
So yes, there is accountability, and more than accountability, there's partnership. What we are doing with our grantees is we're not just giving them a check and saying, go off and be great. We're working with them lockstep through the grant process to support them to make sure they're meeting their goals. We are convening our grantees across the cluster, and because we have the targeted community investment grantees, we also have a couple other grant programs within in our portfolio, and we are providing technical assistance with them for them. We are providing capacity building with them. We are sitting with them and making sure that they are meeting their requirements of the grant. And so this isn't just the y'all will be okay on your own. This is a how do we truly partner to make sure you are doing the work and being accountable for that work, but we're also making sure and supporting you along the way.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Denise. Let's go to Natasha Brown of CBS 3.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. This is for either Tumar, I know you addressed it earlier, or the commissioner, just in reference to some of the shootings and some of the violence that we've been seeing around the recreation centers. Just wondering already if there is more of a police presence in light of that, the violence that we're seeing around those facilities.
Commissioner, I don't know if you want to start or you want me to start.
I can start, and then I can turn it over to Joel. The answer is yes. So what we've done thus far is increase our presence on foot and or stationary at rec centers that have either been identified in hotspots as far as neighborhoods, or where they've had issues already at the rec center or around the rec center. I'm gonna turn it over to Commissioner Dales, because he's been in communications with the commissioner over at Parks and Recs, and I know there are plans in upcoming days to expand the number of rec centers that are available to the public. So as they expand, we're also going to have to expand our presence as well. So Commissioner Dales, you can talk about the planned rollout effective next week, actually.
Right, so thank you, Commissioner. So this week we have increased our presence at the rec centers, actually started 2 weeks ago. This weekend we will be covering down on the, it's going to be in priority order because we have 60 rec centers citywide so far that are open. So we're prioritizing what areas we're going to cover, those where we expect large gatherings, and those that are utilized the most, the rec centers, we pretty much either have a stationary beat there, or we increase our periodic checks. But citywide, in reference to all the rec centers, all sector cars, they are supposed to make periodic checks of these locations. Next week, starting Monday, you're gonna have 120 rec centers will be open. So that means that we have to regroup and talk about how we're gonna cover down on as many rec centers as possible. We are gonna be utilizing overtime, just to let you know. We're gonna prioritize what rec centers we're gonna be covering. We will be reaching out to other agencies, other law enforcement agencies, for assistance with coverage as well. We are focusing on a summer plan, which will start earlier than the summer, of course. And I will go into more details. Hopefully I have more information within the next 2 weeks when we meet again.
But it's also important to remember that during the upcoming budget process, there's going to be some tension regarding financial support for policing. So if we're going to cover every rec center on overtime, there's a cost associated with that, and people have to understand that. And we'll have a robust discussion about it, but the reality is the reality. If we're looking for more police coverage and more police time is money, and we're gonna have to pay for it somehow. So people need to keep that in mind.
Natasha, are you good?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you very much.
Very good, thank you. And finally today, Kristen Johansson of KYW Radio.
Thank you so much. Commissioner, this is for you. I wanted to see, kind of actually coming off of the mayor's comments here, how far, you spoke a little bit about kids, watching your kids, knowing what they're involved in, urging them to, be in communication, the parents should be in communication with the kids. Just as the warmer months kind of come up and we know that the shootings kind of ramp up even more, can you talk about how far is too far for parents, teachers, guardians to kind of observe their kids? Should they be staying indoors? Would you even say that?
No, I wouldn't say keep your kids indoors. What I'm saying is that we all have a responsibility. I also recognize that some folks don't have traditionally what we're referring to as parents. So when I'm pleading actually for anyone, whether it's a guardian, a grandparent, a trusted adult, an influencer, a counselor, a coach, a mentor, whomever that is, anyone that has regular contact with these young people or even young adults, or if they frequent a rec center or they frequent any of these, these community organizations, some of which that we talked talked about today. Anybody that they trust, ask questions. Some folks, I think, just get comfortable and not asking questions. They just assume, well, they're in there, they quiet, or they're outside, you know, they're busy, and, you know, I don't have to deal with them because they're busy. Ask questions, know where they're going, communicate, not just ask how the day went. And, you know, my boys used to be like, oh, how was it? Good. Okay, well, tell me about it. Give me details. You know, what social media platforms are you using? Tell me about it. Let me see. How's it work? You know, create an account, go in there, friend them, use a different name, use a different ID. There's creative ways to do it. But what I'm saying is it's okay to be nosy. And if it's not you, have a friend of yours do it. All I'm saying is just be involved, be engaged, interact. And again, I'm not saying follow your kid wherever you go. I'm not saying, you know, keep your kid in the house, because we all need to get out and stretch our legs. I'm just saying be involved and be, you know, interact. And it doesn't necessarily have to be someone that belongs to you. It takes a village. I truly believe that it takes a village. It was mentioned by Ms. Love earlier. And I think we all need to not only, I don't want to say step up, but recognize that we all have a part to play in this.
Thank you, Commissioner. I know, Shantae, you wanted to add a final word on that.
Yes, I wanted to say that as we all are working together, and that I know we're going to be talking about budget time and everything, that the reason why community groups that are working together, and parents and families should get connected, is for questions like that. It's so that you do have not only resources, but you have the opportunity to connect your young people to different things. COVID and everyone being locked down has showed us a lot of things. And so in order to do that, get connected with community groups. But also, as we are talking about budget, I will be saying community groups need to be funded. They need to be funded in a way. It can't be an either or. We need to do this together. So we have an equity of resources and an equity of ideas. I believe that we can make this happen.
Thank you, Shantae. Perfect way to close, and we appreciate your help, and as well as the help and work of all of our speakers today. We will have our next briefing in 2 weeks, and we will be announcing the day and time for that briefing at a later date. Thank you.